Hello everybody, how are you doing? So today we had day 2 of the appeal hearing at the High Court in London regarding Julian Paul Assange versus government of the United States. So this was the second and final day of the appeal hearing. Just again to recap, the United States is appealing Judge Barrett's decision in January not to extradite Julian Assange. As you recall, Barrett ruled that Assange should not be extradited based on health grounds, right? That it would be too oppressive. There's a heightened risk of suicide. The prison conditions in the US are too inhumane. But when it comes to the conspiracy to commit computer intrusion charge, the 17 other charges under the Espionage Act, the political charges, she agreed with all of them, which makes this a very problematic ruling, even though it's a favorable one. And that's what the United States has been challenging. And on August 11th, there was a preliminary hearing regarding the grounds of appeal. Those were 5 grounds, as we mentioned yesterday. And yesterday, on day 1, it was, mostly devoted to the prosecution. So the prosecution had the entire day to go through the grounds of appeal to explain why they don't agree with the judge's decision, and then at the end, 30 minutes for the defense. And now it was the other way around. Today was the other way around. So today, most of the day was devoted to the defense, to Assange's lawyers responding to the prosecution's arguments and their grounds of appeal. So I'm going to go through this with you once again. I was watching. So I was accredited to cover the court hearing. We did not see Assange today, by the way. Yesterday, we saw him via video link. But I want to make a correction. I want to add something. Yesterday, Julian Assange appeared via video link because he applied to come in person and it was rejected. So he was not even allowed to come to his own hearing, appeal hearing at the High Court. So I'm just telling you that. That's from Stella Morris, his partner. But today, we didn't see him at all. I don't know what the reason is. I have no clue, so I'm not going to speculate, but I'm just telling you that. So no video link, and he wasn't present in person. At least I didn't see him. So let's just go through the thread because, I was live tweeting, of course, which is what I always do. I live report about what is happening so people can find out in real time how the court case is going, and I'm going to summarize everything for you. And once again, this is going to be a long video. I mean, again, if you're going to make a long video, if not this, then what? So definitely, I want to give as much time as possible to go through everything in detail and break it down for you succinctly, but also without cutting any corners, right? So I'm just going to show you the thread, and we'll go through it. Okay, so day 2 of extradition appeal. And of course, this was at the High Court in London, also known as the Royal Courts of Justice. So I also linked to day 1 in case you want to go read that. Okay. And I went through a brief recap of what happened yesterday, just as I did with you right now. I'll just play you very quickly a video from Stella Morris, Assange's partner, just before the court proceedings were set to begin, okay?
The story about the plans to assassinate and kidnap Julian from London will be discussed in court today, so I urge you to stay tuned and follow the proceedings online.
Yeah, so we're going to get to those in a second. So, here we go. So Assange's lawyer, Fitzgerald, he arose for the defense and started responding to the points yesterday that were put forward by the prosecution, right? He said there's no legitimate complaint on ground 1, and there was no failure of the judge to follow the Turner criteria, okay? So this was about whether the judge, applied the test wrong, whether she didn't adequately judge whether Assange meets the requirements for Section 91 under the Extradition Act and so forth. And the prosecution yesterday said, for example, that the judge says she prefers the medical testimony of Professor Koppelman, but she doesn't explain why. Why does the judge prefer Koppelman's testimony over Blackwood and Fazell, who are medical experts called by the prosecution? That's what the prosecution were saying. And the defense responded, well, it's not true, because she does explain why she preferred the testimony of Koppelman. And I'll show you actually from the judgment itself in a second, from the ruling itself. So this is number one, right? And then when it comes to Dealey, so Dealey is another doctor who is called as an expert witness by the defense, and Dealey is the one who diagnosed Julian Assange with Asperger's, with ASD, right, with autism. And again, this was also, yesterday the prosecution were also disputing this. And the response from the defense was that, well, Dr. Dealey is an expert on Asperger's. He's an expert on ASD, okay? And even Fazell and Blackwood, the prosecution's medical experts, agreed that. And Koppelman referred the matter to Dealey. That's why Dealey carried out the test to see if Assange has Asperger's, because he's an expert about this, right? And the quote from the defense was, Dealey is the expert that people look to in this matter, which is true. This is what happened. So when it comes to is the extradition from the UK to the US for Julian Assange, would it be oppressive? Okay. They said that the judge applied this test correctly. Okay. And the judge, one of the judges presiding over the High Court appeal today interrupted the defense to say, we have to remember with Lori Love, the judge concluded that he wouldn't succeed in committing suicide in America. Okay. Because there's this whole argument now about, is Assange too depressed right now to be extradited? Is he too suicidal right now to be extradited? That's the prosecution's argument. The prosecution are not interested in the future. They're saying this doesn't count. And this is going to be addressed by the defense today, right? Or was, but we're going through it. So Fitzgerald's argument, the defense's argument was, quote, imagine if Parliament said we'll never look at the future consequences. Parliament clearly didn't say we'll look at things that happen in the first 6 months. Imagine if the person were to be put in torturous conditions after 2 years, right? So this argument that Assange has to be depressed right now and in a terrible mental state right now in order to block the extradition doesn't make sense, because when Parliament, the British Parliament, they implemented the Extradition Act, and you have Section 91, they didn't impose some kind of artificial limit, as I believe he called it, right? Logically, if Assange is extradited tomorrow, but in 2 years we know that the United States is going to put him in oppressive prison conditions like special administrative measures or ADX Florence, some federal super maximum prison, then the extradition is oppressive. It doesn't matter if it's, immediately the moment he sets foot in the United States or 6 months later or 2 years later. It's still oppressive, right? It's logical. So that's what the defense was arguing. And that the decision not to extradite must consider that if the person's state is such that no matter the conditions that they would take their life, then this makes the extradition oppressive, right? Because the prosecution are saying, well, if Assange is taken to the United States, you don't have to worry because there will be preventative measures to make sure he doesn't kill himself. He will have medical care, so and so, right? But the response from the defense is that, yes, but even despite those measures, if someone is determined to kill themselves to take their own life, they will do it, And if that is the case, then the extradition cannot go forward. And yesterday, the prosecution was saying that, Assange must be impulsive. So they're saying that in order to block the extradition, Assange cannot be able to control his impulse to commit suicide, right? So they're saying if he doesn't have some uncontrollable urge to take his own life, then he's fit to be extradited. That's their whole argument. And the defense answered that this is not a question of an uncontrollable impulse to commit suicide. If someone is driven by their mental disorder to take their own life, then it is oppressive, right? If the prediction is that he'll commit suicide no matter the steps taken, then that satisfies the test, even if there are protections in place, okay? And Fitzgerald goes a step further here, right? He says that not only did the judge in January apply the test correctly, she even went a step further. She said that if extradited to the United States, the conditions are so bad that Assange will certainly commit suicide. So it's not just about the extradition, it's also about the conditions in the United States, in the prison. They're so bad that it's practically guaranteed that he'll commit suicide. This is the point they're making here, right? Then they argued the fact you have standard protective measures in place is not enough. There are cases where the degree of mental disorder and suicide risk is such that the defendant cannot be extradited. That's a humane approach by Parliament. Okay? And then he responds to an argument by the prosecution that they called a trump card. Remember, Lewis, the prosecution, he was arguing that, well, anyone can just say that they're too depressed or they're suicidal and use that as a trump card to never get extradited and say that no matter what protective measures the United States has, they just shouldn't be extradited, right? So the prosecution was claiming that this puts the requesting state, meaning the United States in this case, in an impossible position. Because if you're saying that no matter what, Assange is going to take his life, then there's nothing the United States can possibly do to bring him to justice, because you're always going to say that he's too ill to be extradited. So the defense responded to this argument and said that Parliament put this protection in place for the seriously mentally ill. Okay, this protection in place meaning Section 91, where you could bar an extradition based on it being oppressive to someone's mental or physical health. Okay, and he says the judge acted in accordance with the law. Okay, and if the prosecution want to change the law, that's fine, but they should do that in the future. But at the time, in January, the judge ruled correctly, and she acted in accordance with the law when she blocked the extradition on health grounds. Okay, and then he says that if Assange will circumvent any protective measures and take his own life, then the extradition is oppressive and must be halted. Okay, and here he makes an interesting point about cross-examination. So he said the United States only submit witness statements. They don't actually subject themselves to cross-examination. He said they cross-examine till the cows come home. They cross-examine till the cows come home, the defense expert on prison conditions, but don't subject themselves to cross-examination. Okay? So he was referring to, I mean, this is true. You know, when I just off of the top of my head, you can count the people who testified for the prosecution on one hand, I think, you know. I mean, the ones who were subjected to cross-examination. Like, who is it again? Fazell, Blackwood, and you know, most of the things were submitted as written statements. Kronberg, for example, AUSA Kronberg, the federal prosecutor, who we'll get to in a second about the assurances. I mean, this guy, you know, that's who they were hinting at. He's saying that SAMs are okay and prison conditions are okay in the U.S., but he wasn't available for cross-examination, right? So just before I go any further, I just want to take a step back here and tell you that there are 5 grounds of appeal, right? But in general, I'm kind of, you know, summarizing this. The 2 main topics were Assange's health, the suicide risk, and the other one being the assurances that the United States is offering. So I'm doing the health part first because that's how it went, and then we'll get to the assurances afterwards, okay? So just so you understand how this is going. The defense then said, for example, in countries like Russia, they will call the interior minister to give evidence and say, look, we'll take all these protective steps. And his point is that the United States does not submit its expert witnesses for cross-examination. And other countries, other places, they take they make more effort, right? As I said, referring to Kronberg in this case. And then the defense said, listen, if you get extradited to a foreign state, be it Russia or the United Arab Emirates, Parliament is giving the courts the power to protect, because you can't simply make the assumption that they have equivalent or greater protections, right? So his point is that you can't just assume the United States is going to take care of Assange and just send every person who is requested for extradition on their way, right? And again, he says that Parliament has created this thing to protect the mentally and physically disordered from an extradition that is oppressive, okay? And it's not inconsistent to say we'll give people additional protections before they are sent irretrievably to a foreign state, okay? And they mentioned SAMs, so Special Administrative Measures, and ADX Florence. Once again, Special Administrative Measures, we will get to those in a second about the assurances, but you know, these are extremely oppressive, it's the worst thing. Like, if you go to the United States and you're jailed there, SAMS is the worst thing that you could possibly be put in. You know, it's really like way up there, and you can't communicate with anyone. And again, we've talked about this extensively, but I'll get into it afterwards. And ADX Florence is one of the worst. I think it's the worst prison in the United States. It's a federal super maximum. You know, they have Richard Reed, I think the shoe bomber who's there, Abu Hamza. Like, you know, they're basically saying they're going to put Julian Assange, a journalist, with a bunch of terrorists. Literally, this is the prison where they want to send him. Just like Belmarsh right now in the UK, he's put there with a bunch of terrorists. You know, so. They also mentioned the CIA plots to kill or kidnap Assange, which again we'll get to again in a second. Okay. So when it comes to the impulse, I talked about this a few minutes ago, but again, the prosecution said that Assange must be impulsive, and the defense responded that's just not how psychiatrists speak. You know, you can still be suicidal and not be impulsive. Not every mental disorder is characterized by impulsivity. There are some people who have a mental disorder or a personality disorder that makes them impulsive, and their suicidal ideation might be impulsive. But with other people, they're not impulsive, but they still have suicidal ideation, and that's the point they're trying to make. I mean, this is. Again, it's not something exclusive to Assange. You know, this is kind of like it's common sense, really. But you know, an example that Fitzgerald gave is like, you know, take for example a poor woman who is being extradited, and because of her, you know, her mental disorder, she's driven to make plans to kill herself. You know, she's making plans, which is not impulsive. But she's still driven to suicide by the mental disorder, right? Because she has such a catastrophic worldview because of the mental disorder that she's still driven to suicide. So this is the same thing here. This is a very straightforward argument, right? So again, Fitzgerald says Parliament has not constructed any artificial limits how far you can look down the line. Right? There is no restriction in Section 91 on when the conditions must be oppressive. It either is or it isn't, you know? So when the prosecution were saying that they're taking a crystal ball type approach, that basically the Assange defense lawyers are predicting, they're predicting into the future that it will be bad. Well, you know, even if they were, it is of a practical certainty that Assange will be put in oppressive conditions, because we have, you know, the witness statements, which we'll get to in a bit. But again, there's no legal limit. You know, the law does not say that, well, Assange has to immediately be put in very bad prison conditions to block the extradition. No, it's simply, if Assange is going to be put in oppressive prison conditions, the extradition must be blocked. It's that simple, right? And not just Assange, but any defendant or any respondent who's being extradited. That is the test. That is the legal test that the defense are trying to explain, right? And the prosecution yesterday made an argument that no one ever extradited from the UK to the US has committed suicide. Okay? And the response to this from the defense was that, yes, because English courts have specifically made sure that people like Laurie Love or Gary McKinnon are not placed in that kind of risk, right? It's because of the courts and I guess in Gary McKinnon's case, Theresa May, the Home Secretary, former Home Secretary, interfering to stop the extradition, that you have never had someone extradited to the US from the UK who then committed suicide. It's because the courts stopped it before it could happen, right? So I interviewed Gary McKinnon. The US was trying to extradite him before the UK had even passed the extradition act. It was while they were writing it. So, you know, Gary McKinnon, he perpetrated the biggest computer hack of all time. He hacked the Department of Defense, NASA, the Army, the Air Force. It's ridiculous. So I interviewed him. It's on my website. Go read it. RichardMedhurst.com/articles. You can find it. And we talked about Assange and everything. So he also had a huge legal battle with the US before Laurie Love, before Assange. And thankfully his extradition was withdrawn. So the defense went on to say that Section 91 does not require to find some fault on the part of the requesting state. It can be oppressive simply because of the consequence of extradition, right? Because yesterday, the prosecution was saying that the defense are conflating Article 3 under the European Convention on Human Rights, which is basically forbidding inhumane treatment, okay? And Section 91 under the Extradition Act in British law. So the response here from the defense is that perhaps in Article 3, under the European Convention on Human Rights, under the ECHR, perhaps in Article 3 you have much more requirements. You have to prove that there's some kind of fault on the requesting state. You have to prove that the United States is intending to, put Assange in a hellhole. But under Section 91, in British law, you don't have to prove fault on the part of the requesting state. Just by virtue of the extradition causing the respondent to commit suicide, that makes it oppressive, right? So it's not because of the prison conditions alone. It's just, will the extradition prompt the defendant to take their own life? Yes, then it's mentally oppressive and it can be halted. That's their point. They say Section 91 adds an additional protection compared to Article 3, and Parliament, the British Parliament, clearly did not intend for reassurances from the US to be relied upon. Okay? Now, when we talk about Professor Koppelman, right? So again, I hope most of you are already up to date, but I sometimes assume that perhaps someone who doesn't know is watching, so I'm going to explain it to them. Professor Koppelman is the key medical expert called by the defense, by Assange's defense. And he made 2 medical reports, psychiatric evaluations, both before the extradition hearing, okay? So the extradition hearing was last year in September, October 2020. So he made 2 reports before that. In the first report, Koppelman does not disclose the identity of Assange's partner, Stella Morris, or that they had 2 children together in the embassy because of fears for Assange's safety, right? And the safety of his partner and children. So what the prosecution have been saying is that, well, look, Professor Koppelman hid this information from the court, so he misled the court. Because Professor Koppelman's medical testimony is the heaviest. He spent the most time with Assange out of all the doctors, and he has said that Assange is diagnosed with PTSD, generalized anxiety disorder, MDD, and also the traits of ASD. So because his report is very significant and it was preferred by the judge, the prosecution are trying to poke holes inside of it. So instead of, they are going after the medical evidence itself, but at the same time, they're questioning his integrity, his duty to the court as an expert witness. So they're saying that he misled the court. Okay? Now, what they were claiming is that he misled the court, and the response by the defense was that this is not true, right? That the judge found no such thing. Okay? The defense recalled that the U.S. has recklessly, publicly stated on a number of occasions that there was a finding the court had been misled by Koppelman. This is not true. Okay? And the judge, this is today in the High Court, said, was his first report misleading? Koppelman's report, the first report where he did not disclose the identity of Morris. Fitzgerald says, yes, it was, but there were a number of reports that the court had been misled, and that is not the same thing, right? There's a difference between a report being misleading and the court being misled by the expert witness. That's 2 different things. So Assange's lawyers say it's not true, and the judge found no such thing, and she pointed this out in her explanation, right? So I've already read it to you yesterday, but we'll get back to it in a second. This is a very interesting point now about the children, because the prosecution are saying Koppelman is essentially they're saying he's dishonest, he misled the court, he hid the children from the court, he did not disclose that Assange had 2 children in the embassy and so on. Apparently, the prosecution's own medical witness, Dr. Blackwood, also knew about the children, and he did not put it in his report. So by that logic, the prosecution's own medical expert also misled the court, right? So that's the point that they made today about Dr. Blackwood. So they said that Assange voluntarily told Dr. Blackwood, one of the prosecution's medical experts, that he had had 2 children with Stella Morris. The prosecution had nothing kept from them by Assange. This is merely out of concern by Koppelman for the privacy and safety of Assange's family that he did not disclose the identity. Okay? And The defense admitted, they accepted that it would have been better if Assange had said that he cannot disclose the name of his partner. They accept that it was perhaps, not the best thing to do. They accept that now. But the second report, Koppelman does mention Stella Morris' name. He does disclose the identity. And it's important to note the chronology here, because the reports by Koppelman were December 2019 and August 2020, right? So this is before the court has heard any psychiatric evidence, okay? And the court was aware of this already in April about the children. So nothing was withheld really from the court. They knew. And Koppelman also said this in a second report. They're just trying to, they're trying to ruin the case. They're trying to take down Assange on a technicality. That's what this is about. That's what this is about, okay? So Assange's lawyers refer to the CIA's plots against Assange. They said that they were taking counsel's notes, right? They were taking his lawyers' notes, making photocopies. They had actually, there's a speech by Morris herself that I'm going to play you in a second, where she talks about this. And they said that the CIA stole his counsel's notes. They were photocopying them. They were seeking DNA from the nappies of one of Stella Morris' children. They tried to steal a diaper, basically, to make sure that it was Assange's kid. There was even talk of poisoning or kidnapping Julian Assange, right? So I'm just going to play this quickly right now for you, because I think it's important to put it on now. Here we go.
Before we were able to go through the timeline of events since Julian's arrest, or even before that, how he had been spied on in the embassy. His lawyers had been targeted by name. The Spanish lawyer's office was broken into. His lawyer's notes were seized and copied. Our eldest son's DNA was instructed to be stolen. My mother was followed. I was followed. Julian was spied on in every little detail. And we knew this almost as soon as Julian was arrested, because whistleblowers who had been working in these illegal operations couldn't.
Right, so just to go back quickly to my point, this is why Koppelman did not disclose her identity. There was a fear for safety, okay? And now there's another point here, because the Spanish revelations, meaning, because UC Global, this company, this Spanish company, which was basically contracted by the CIA or US intelligence, pretty sure it's the CIA though, they were contracted by the US to spy on Assange because they were doing security for the embassy, so they had access to him. And these revelations began coming out in May 2019, okay? And there was, the extradition hearing was coming up for February 2020, so there was pressure to submit evidence, and the window was closing for that, right? And it became clear that this wasn't going to deal with anything except the extradition treaty, okay? So if I understood correctly, again, sometimes the audio is terrible, but if I understood correctly, Koppelman was advised not to disclose the identity of Morris, right, at that time. But then, of course, things were pushed back because of the pandemic, and so, things were postponed. And by then, I mean, it had already become clear in the second psychiatric report. By then, Koppelman had mentioned Stella Morris' name, and it was already public, okay? So, in any case, the point being made here is that it wasn't out of ill intent or something, this was out of fear for their privacy and safety. Assange's lawyers pointed out that the prosecution's lawyers make a great hullabaloo that Assange had two children in the embassy, but not one of the other psychiatrists wrote about this in their reports, now that it's become known. Again, this is a very important point. Blackwood had known about Assange's children from March onwards, Blackwood being a medical expert called by the prosecution. Okay? So one of the arguments by the prosecution was that the judge basically did not care about this, or she didn't take it into consideration. And this is not true, because once again, what did the judge say in January? She said, "In my judgment, Professor Koppelman's decision to conceal their relationship was misleading and inappropriate in the context of his obligations to the court, but an understandable human response to Miss Moore's predicament. He explained that a relationship with Mr. Assange was not yet in the public domain, and that she was very concerned about her privacy." So she did deal with this. She did deal with this. And as we mentioned, the court had already become aware of this in April 2020, of the a true position in April 2020. So by the time medical and psychiatric testimony was given, there was nothing being hidden. By then, all was known. All was revealed. And then the defense goes on to say the Judge Baretzer, does not say it's not important for the rules to be observed. She says the rule was not abided by, but in the particular circumstances, she finds it was understandable and does not breach. It does not take away from Koppelman's independence and impartiality as a medical expert witness. So she did deal with this. And she did say it's inappropriate, but it doesn't take away from his medical expertise. Okay? Professor Koppelman concealed Stella Morris' identity and the children. This was not done in cahoots with Julian Assange and Stella Morris. It wasn't done to obtain a tactical advantage. It was done to protect their privacy and their safety. And that is not grounds for exclusion or inadmissibility. And it's neither grounds to give the evidence less weight or no weight, which is what the prosecution wanted. They either wanted to exclude, well, we know yesterday when they clarified that they wanted to give it less weight, actually. They didn't want to completely exclude it. They clarified that to the judge. So, Assange's lawyers then said this is a miserable attempt by the United States lawyers to tarnish the reputation of a distinguished neuropsychiatrist, Professor Koppelman, right? And the prosecution's other argument was that the judge didn't explain why she prefers Koppelman's medical testimony over the other experts, because, as you recall, there were, there were so many of them, honestly. But when it comes, when it comes to the prosecution, what was it again? Feazell and Blackwood, and then the defense called Koppelman, Dr. Dealey, and Cosby, I think it was, right? In any case, the prosecution were basically saying, well, why does the judge prefer the defense's medical expert? Why does she prefer Koppelman over ours? She doesn't explain that. And the defense said that's not true. She does explain it. Here's how she explains it. The judge said, Dr. Blackwood, remember, he's for the prosecution, Dr. Blackwood provided a broad overview of the prison medical notes and opined that they revealed a more ordinary clinical picture of depression. However, his summary of the notes was significantly less detailed than the summary provided by Professor Koppelman, and he did not appear to have access to all relevant notes. Right? So she does explain why she prefers Koppelman. It's right there. It's in the ruling in January. So it is clear that she addressed this. She explains why. Blackwood's notes were simply not as detailed as Koppelman's, right? And on the criticism that Baretzer did not address what a high risk of suicide means, this is also not true. She addressed numerous findings by all the medical experts, including those of the prosecution. And that, statistics, they can only take you so far, but there's no sound basis to reject the judge's finding of risk of suicide, which took into account everything, all the evidence, all the testimony, all the medical records. Okay? And Feazell, who's the other medical expert called by the prosecution, he said Assange's risk of suicide is dynamic and dependent on changes in circumstances. Okay? This is a very interesting point. Because what is Feazell saying? Feazell is arguing that Assange does not have a high risk of suicide because you have to compare his risk of suicide to a population of prisoners with the same age and gender. Okay, that's his argument. You have to compare Assange to other prisoners. And what did Assange's lawyers respond? They said that in the United States, people are jailed for just a joint of marijuana. So this idea that Assange would have a lower risk of suicide compared to other prisoners in the United States is inaccurate, because the United States has a prison population that is 7 times higher. So it's not an accurate comparison, even if you take his approach. And then when it comes to the impulsivity to commit suicide, I went through this a bit with you, that, not all mental disorders are characterized by impulse. Nils Melzer. So, again, Nils Melzer is the special rapporteur on torture for the United Nations. I interviewed him on the channel. You can go watch it if you want. His report, because he visited Assange in Belmarsh with 2 physicians, his report is quoted by Professor Koppelman. And this angered the prosecution because they were saying basically that, oh, well, this is a politicized report because it mentions things about Assange being politically persecuted, basically, and bullied and mobbed by governments. But there are parts in the report about his health, because a psychiatrist, 2 physicians came with Nils Melzer to evaluate Assange's health, right? And Nils Melzer concluded that Mr. Assange showed all symptoms typical for prolonged exposure to psychological torture, including extreme stress, chronic anxiety, and intense psychological trauma. So this is the part, this paragraph here, the parts about Julian Assange's health are quoted by Professor Koppelman. He quotes Nils Melzer in these parts. And the defense said that you can't say to Koppelman that he shouldn't quote Nils Melzer because there are lousy parts in his report, basically the political parts, because Koppelman doesn't even do that, right? Because the prosecution is saying you can't quote this report from Nils Melzer. It's political. It talks about Assange being bullied and such. So yeah, but Koppelman is not quoting those parts. He's only quoting the medical ones. There's a psychiatrist who visited Assange with him and did an evaluation. That's the only parts. Those are the only parts, the medical parts, that Koppelman is quoting, right? So it's a weird double standard. They're angry about Koppelman for things he didn't even quote. So then we had lunch break. We had a lunch break, and then the court returned. Just want to show you the protesters outside the court briefly. Team Assange. So they were showing up in strength, and I'll play the videos for you in a second because they're very important. But now after the lunch break, what happened essentially is that the defense sort of concluded their arguments about Assange's health as they responded to everything, and they addressed the grounds of appeal in the U.S. Assuring, basically, right? Making assurances that they won't put Assange in ADX Florence, right? Sorry, ADX Colorado. They won't put. No, sorry, I got that right. ADX Florence in Colorado. It's been a long day. Basically, the United States is making assurances. They're saying, well, you're saying Assange is going to be in a terrible condition in the U.S. Okay, we're not going to put him in special administrative measures in SANS. We're not going to put him in ADX Colorado. So these assurances that they're calling diplomatic assurances, this is what the defense addressed now. Okay, so I think this was perhaps. I mean, everything is important, obviously, all the time because this case is so big. But I think what is so important here is they brought up the Yahoo News article, for example, which just came out recently, which we'll get to in a second. And that's the first time we heard about this in court. So this is crazy, So Fitzgerald, he handed over the reins to Mark Summers. So Mark Summers is another lawyer on Assange's team. And they talked about the surveillance of Assange in the Ecuadorian embassy, right? Because this company, UC Global, was basically contracted, hired by the Americans to spy on Assange. And they did everything. They recorded his conversations with his lawyers. They had a microphone under a fire extinguisher, a microphone in the ladies' toilet. They had shotgun microphones outside. They put stickers on the windows to kill the vibrations from the white noise machine, to try and record him from outside the embassy. They were recording him with video, everything, right? So, but it's not just that. There were also plans, they discussed plans at least, to maybe kidnap or kill Assange, right? So these things were discussed, even though they didn't necessarily go ahead with them. And they start talking about this in the court, right? And Assange reported this to Koppelman, to the psychiatrist, and as it says here, this was corroborated by anonymous witnesses of UC Global. So when I was in London during the extradition hearing, I was sitting with Fidel Narvaez, who's the former consul for the Ecuadorian embassy. And we get to the part about UC Global, and he scoffs, because like he's been through all this crap with Julian Assange, like being spied on and everything. He knows, right? He knows. And we heard this witness testimony from former employees of UC Global. So their identities have been concealed, but they were given permission to do so they can keep their identity secret. And they submitted witness testimony, written statements about the plans that the head of the company, David Morales, who was being basically contracted by the U.S. intelligence, to do all these things, spy on Assange. They were sending these things, uploading them to servers, bringing them with hard disks by hand, etc. So they revealed all of this stuff, right? And that's why it's so important, because we have multiple people corroborating this now. It's not just like one Yahoo News article. We knew this from before already. Assange's lawyers, just going back briefly, they said something about his health, that none of the psychiatrists, there are no psychiatrists who accused him of faking his mental illness, right? So all the psychiatrists who evaluated Assange, maybe they don't agree together 100%. Actually, not maybe. They don't all agree on on everything. They have varying opinions, but none of them said that he's a malingerer. None of them said he's faking his mental illness. Okay, so there's nothing about that. And when we come to the assurances, right? So Summers argues there's no guarantee the US will follow through on diplomatic assurances not to place Julian under SAMS or to jail him in ADX Florence, a federal super maximum prison. He said it's too late for the US to be offering those assurances after the judge ruled against them. He said, quote, that should have happened much earlier. And he makes the point that, the United States had ample time and opportunity to say, you know what? We're not going to put Assange under SAMS, under special administrative measures. We're not going to send him to ADX Florence. They could have said this at any time. And how does he substantiate this argument? AUSA Kronberg, the federal prosecutor, he not only indicated very strongly that Assange is, practically destined to be put under SAMS, but he even started arguing about why it's okay. Like, SAMS are not that bad. This was followed by days of evidence. I remember, right? I remember this. They spent days discussing this. What are special administrative measures? Are they brutal? How bad are they? What does the United States legal team say about that? What do people who've worked in the prison bureau, Federal Bureau of Prison Systems say that? So he said that they could have said this before, but they didn't. They chose to run the case differently for perceived tactical benefit, and they lost. And it's because they lost the case, the United States lost the extradition battle in January. Now they're trying to play differently. Now they're saying, no, we're not going to put Assange under SAMS, and so on and so on. That's his point, right? And the question is here, that the test for that is, was the United States given a fair opportunity to present assurances before, right? Now, the prosecution say they weren't. They say the judge should have made this clear and given them a fair chance to produce these assurances before. But then at the same time, the prosecution say, but we can give them at any time throughout the process, even during the appeals process, which is such a contradiction. Like, if you know you can give them at any time, then why didn't you give them before? It makes no sense. So now the United States is arguing that there will be no SAMS, right? But the defense don't believe this. And as I said, they reference the statements made by federal prosecutor Kronberg. He not only said that SAMs are a possibility, he said that the CIA can have a role in implementing them. So it's not just the Attorney General. The CIA, the organization, the agency, which Assange has exposed, various crimes of, will have a role in this, right? And this is true. Kronberg also spoke of the regime, so how they work, what the conditions are, and that they're subject to remedy. You know, there was this whole thing about, well, you know, even if Assange were to be placed in these horrific prison conditions under SAMS, he still has the option to appeal this. There's like a whole process, and it turns out, as we heard from one of the expert witnesses, no one has ever been successful in this process, ever. Not one person. But you can slowly lift these restrictions off. Not one person has ever been able to do that. So, you know, they were really driving this point home. The United States was really trying to argue SAMs are not that bad. Okay, so this is a fact. They could have said, we don't want Assange under SAMs. They didn't. In fact, they were arguing these are fine things. They were saying SAMs are possible, but they're okay, right? And they spoke of Abu Hamza, who we'll get to again in a second, and how there are no checks on the Attorney General's power to impose them, right? It's just the CIA can do that, the Attorney General can do that, can just do them, you know, at will. And Kronberg claimed that under SAMS, prisoners have access to other parts of the prison. It's not solitary confinement. They have due process. And then we get to, of course, Maureen Baird, right? So she's the former warden of MCC in New York. MCC is of course, an infamous jail in New York. And Maureen Baird was the warden. She was in charge of this jail. Right, so that's not some tiny jail. It's very famous, and she had prisoners who were put under pretrial SAMs. And as the defense points out, when Maureen Baird testified at Assange's extradition hearing, she demolished Kronberg's points one by one. She used to run a jail, so she would know, and she disagreed with him point by point about everything. This argument, this claim that prisoners they can access counseling, not true. That there are programs, not true. That inmates can speak to each other, that they have due process, that there's free-flowing mail. This is all untrue, as Maureen Baird testified, right? So I'm just going to read you a little quote, which is in the ruling from her testimony. She says, quote, inmates were in solitary confinement, technically, for 24 hours per day. There was absolutely no communication by any means with other inmates. Okay? The only form of human interaction they encountered was when correctional officers opened the viewing slot during their inspection rounds of the unit, when institution staff walked through the unit during their required weekly rounds, or when meals were delivered through the secure meal slot in the door. Right? So 1 hour recreation was offered to inmates in this unit each day. However, in my experience, oftentimes an inmate would decline this opportunity because it was much of the same as their current situation. The recreation area in the unit consisted of a small barren indoor cell, absent any exercise equipment. So do you understand what's happening now? When you're put under SAMS, the only interaction you get is when the guards inspect your cell or give you food. That's the only human interaction you ever have. And the recreation is going into another empty room. Yeah, this is real. I mean, I've told you all this before, but they're recalling this to show how the United States absolutely said they will put, there's a chance they will put Assange under SAMS. And they were arguing in favor of this point that it's not just possible, but okay, that they had to bring in expert witnesses like Maureen Baird to show that it's not okay, right? And another thing, which is very interesting, take a look at this. Can you read that? Interesting. There had been no suicides in that jail for 13 years, except him. I mean, I don't need to tell you what's going to happen to Assange. I mean, one way or another, just like, let's speak realistically here. One way or another, they're killing him. Right now in England, they're killing him. You know, when you're put in Belmarsh prison, he's not even been extradited yet. I mean, I hope he's not, God forbid. But even if you remove extradition, these 10 years, that's you've killed a part of this man already. You've already taken away from his health. So this idea, I say this because a lot of people are talking about the CIA potentially plotting to assassinate him, which is bad in of itself. But you have to remember the process is the punishment as well. It's also killing him. I'm telling you, man. I mean, for what it's worth, just for what it's worth, if you, in addition to all this medical expert testimony, in addition to what his partner is saying, in addition to what everyone else is saying, I've seen the man, and he does not look well. He really does not look well, and it pains me very much to say that. So, Assange's lawyers, they said that the notion that the United States did not have an opportunity beforehand to take SAMS off the table is, with all due respect, nonsense. right? This is insane now. So they pointed to other statements by Kronberg that Assange would be okay under SAMS. They said he could play crochet. He could engage in poetry. And here's the best one, he could communicate with cells below him and above him, seemingly through the plumbing, right? So when they say you can communicate with other prisoners, what they mean is you have to shout like this and maybe talk through the plumbing. What is that? This is really what's being argued in court. Again, this is not just from today. They were saying this. This is from last year where they were saying this, and they believe this. They're really adamant about this. And here's another thing that Kronberg said. This is also real. He said that Assange could recreate individually. That's an actual quote. Recreate individually. And Summers, Assange's lawyer, called it a brilliant euphemism, which made me laugh because so this idea that they couldn't offer assurances before is wrong, and it's because they lost the case that they're doing this. Now, the CIA, right? So at this point, what Assange's lawyers did is they told the judges to look at the Yahoo News article. So this article came out, in September? And September 26th. And this was an investigative report. So they had spoken to 30 US officials confirming. So this is not new. We already knew this, but it confirmed what we heard from the anonymous witnesses who worked at UC Global, right? That it's true. There were discussions at the CIA about potentially kidnapping Julian Assange and or poisoning him. I mean, this is real. So they confirmed what we already knew. And at this point, this is the first time this is brought up in court. Because last year, let me tell you what happened last year. I told you I was there in the court. And they brought up the anonymous statements. They read through them, and that's it. And in the ruling, what the judge finally decided in January, she didn't discard them. She didn't exclude the witness testimonies, but she said that she wants to wait until the trial in Spain is over because these former employees at UC Global are testifying against the head of the company who was working with the US, David Morales. And basically her argument was that she cannot rule on this because that trial is not finished yet. And then we have this article that comes out last month, and is finally mentioned in court. So this is we've covered this again. I covered this here with you, but I'm just going to read you the title again. The title is Kidnapping, Assassination, and a London Shootout. Inside the CIA Secret War Plans Against WikiLeaks. Right? So they don't just talk about these plots. They actually go much more into detail. We learn that they were also considering perhaps doing this to other people in WikiLeaks. It's not just Assange, right? So that's important. But there's a separate video about that if you want to go watch it that I did. So Summers also added something which I think was so important, and I'm very glad that he said this because it's absolutely reasonable. He said that, if they, basically, I'm just paraphrasing, he said if they have any doubts about the authenticity of this article, they should just look at what Mike Pompeo said, the former CIA director. And I wrote here, I'm just speculating, but I think he's referring to this article where Mike Pompeo is saying that the sources for this article need to be prosecuted. Again, what if this is not true, if the Yahoo News article is not true, why would Mike Pompeo say that the sources for the article need to be prosecuted? Obviously, it's true. He's saying the people who leaked this information need to be prosecuted because what they said is true. So he inadvertently confirmed that this article is true. And the defense pointed that out today. So that's important. And they talked about how, if U.S. officials interviewed for the article said that, they would have charges ready for Assange, the Spanish involvement of UC Global. And then he posed the question, given all the evidence of CIA working to kidnap or poison Assange, how likely is it that this agency is to certify Assange as someone who should be placed under special administrative measures the moment he sets foot in the United States of America? Right? And this is, of course, an extremely pertinent question because, as we said before, who gets to decide whether Assange is placed in these terrible prison conditions in SAMS? The CIA and the Attorney General, right? So the agency the agency whose documents were leaked, whose crimes were leaked in multiple publications by WikiLeaks, you think they're going to be soft on Julian Assange? This is the same agency that was talking about maybe killing him. Of course they're going to put him under SAMS. How could any rational person on this earth think otherwise? I mean, seriously, regardless what you think about Assange or the CIA, what do you think they're going to do to him? It's so obvious that they will put him on under SAMS the moment he sets foot, right? Summers said, it will happen. It will happen regardless of whether the doctors said isolation will lead to death, okay? These assurances from the United States take us nowhere at all because SAMS can still happen, okay? And he then asks the question, what if the United States could redo the case and say, you know what? No ADX, no SAMS. They're not doing that. But let's assume hypothetically, what if they did that? Well, the defense's impression is that these conditions would still be oppressive. The conditions that Assange would be placed in would still be oppressive. Let's explain why. Because if Assange is sent to the United States, he will most certainly, 110% be sent to Alexandria, right? Because the Eastern District Court in Virginia, this is where it's called the Espionage Court. This is where they started the whole case against him. And he will be put in the same place they put Chelsea Manning, in this jail, right? And when he's sent there, so keep in mind, this is pre-trial. This is before a trial even begins. Assange will most certainly be put in administrative segregation. And the point they're trying to make here is that administrative segregation, or ADSEG, I'm just going to call it ADSEG from now on because it's shorter. ADSEG is just like SAMS, but with less restrictions on communication, right? So you're still going to be stuck in your cell for over 20 hours a day, okay? And the defense described it as solitary confinement, right? They said it's SAMS without additional restrictions on communication, okay? So Kronberg, the federal prosecutor for the US, also, again, admits that they're possible. Administrative segregation, ADSEG, is possible. But he said it's okay. So despite all this evidence of how terrible ADSEG is, he thinks it's okay because you get all prison services unless you're deemed to be a security risk. And then, of course, this is what the lawyers are arguing as well. They're saying that, no, it's not so bad. You get all the prison services, right? The United States say ADSEG is not solitary because inmates can communicate with each other through the doors by shouting. Again, I don't know what to tell you here. This is their idea of not being in solitary, and being able to communicate with prisoners. It's shouting so that maybe someone in another cell can hear you. That's their idea of communication. And they said, the Assange's lawyer said, quote, you can proceed entirely confident that in the event of surrender to the United States of America, Julian Assange will enter into administrative segregation at Alexandria for years. And at this point, the judge asks him, how come? Why for years? And then Summers responds, because that's how long it will take before a trial can even happen. So the point that the defense are trying to make here is that even if the United States says, okay, you know what? We won't place Assange under SAMS. When he goes to the United States, if he goes to the United States, in pretrial, he will be in something that is akin to SAMS. He will be in ADSEG, which is just as, almost just as bad, basically. That's their point. And not only that, but for years. He will be in ADSEG for years. It's on purpose, right? This is what Stella Morris is talking about when she says it's punishment by process. Just look at what's happening in England right now. The extradition hearing, how long ago was this? Right? So just over a year right now, just over a year. So last September, October, right? And technically it's almost 2 years if you consider that it started in February, right? And there was a break. So, and Assange before that, right? So they made him serve out this sentence in Belmarsh, and then they kept him there anyway on remand. And then even after the extradition hearing, even after the judge rules in his favor, he's still in jail. Like again, the bail hearing at Westminster Magistrates Court. So this is 2 days after the ruling in January. It was on January 4th. Assange won the extradition battle. January 6th, 2 days later, bail hearing. Can he get out? He just won against the United States. Can he be let out? Nope. No, that's in January. We're in October. He's still in jail. Right? So just look at what's happening in England. Never mind what will happen in the United States. This is my point. And the conditions, of course, even in Belmarsh prison. Remember, in Belmarsh prison, he's also in a cell basically the entire day. So isolation, mental illness, these are all things that are a problem right now. A problem right now, not just if he goes to the US. So Summers explains, this is just administrative segregation. Never mind if he's placed under SAMS, which will restrict his communication. Okay. And the United States assurances are not enough. They're not enough because the source, what they identify as the source of isolation, is not just SAMS. It's both SAMS and or administrative segregation, right? So this is very important because the United States, they're saying that, well, if we remove the SAMS, then the risk of suicide goes down and then the extradition is okay. Do you get the logic here? And they're saying the defense's entire case, the medical evidence, everything is built on the premise that Assange will be placed under SAMS at ADX Florence. And they're saying, well, okay, if we remove this, then you have to extradite him. And the defense is saying, no, it's not just about SAMS, it's also about ADSEG, which you've also practically guaranteed is going to take place. And in January, the judge, District Court Judge Bretzer, she said that Mr. Assange faces the bleak prospect of severely restrictive detention conditions designed to remove physical contact and reduce social interaction and contact with the outside world to a bare minimum. He faces these prospects as someone with a diagnosis of clinical depression and persistent thoughts of suicide. Okay? And whether the risk of suicide is high or very high, it's a risk that is very real. And Mr. Assange had told one of the psychiatrists, specifically Blackwood, who's a medical expert for the prosecution, Mr. Assange had told him of the profound degree of psychological suffering he expected to experience in administrative segregation. So Assange himself is fully aware this is not just a question of SAMS. Even in administrative segregation, it will lead to that. And correct me if I'm wrong, but if memory serves me right, Chelsea Manning was also placed in ADSEG, and she tried to commit suicide in the same jail that Assange would be placed in pretrial, right? So, I mean, what more do you need, right? But in any case, I'm just laying out the arguments by the defense, so what they responded, right? So they're saying ADSEG is isolation, and there's no assurance from the United States not to place Assange under ADSEG. All the evidence, including Kronberg, is that ADSEG is in prospect for Mr. Assange. So even if they take SAMS off the table, which they won't, because that's certain, ADSEG is also oppressive. It's essentially special administrative measures, but without restrictions on communication. Okay? And here he gets to another point. So he's addressing the argument about removing SAMS, the assurance about removing SAMS. Now he addresses the argument about not putting Assange in ADX Florence, in this hellhole of a prison in Colorado. Okay? So he says, if the United States agree, they assure that they will not put Julian Assange in ADX Florence, he's still in trouble because they have other options waiting for him. Assange could be sent to a communications management unit called a CMU. That's, again, according to Lewis, Kronberg, so, they're affirming this, the prosecution. And a communications management unit is a prison within a prison. It's an experiment in social isolation. Correspondence is limited to a 1 6-page letter per week to one recipient. Alternatively, if he's not sent to a CMU, he could be sent to a high-security unit in a high-security prison or a special housing unit in a high-security prison. And he says that about 5% of prisoners, of inmates under the Federal Bureau of Prisons are in special housing units. These are special units inside of prisons designed to isolate inmates from each other and the outside world, right? From each other and the outside world. And this is why assurances from the United States at this stage are so wrong. Because if they had said beforehand, this is the argument from the defense, they're saying that you're only saying now that you won't put Assange in ADX Florence. But it's wrong to do that now, because if you had have told this before, then the judge could have addressed that too, right? They say that had we known ADX was off the table, we would have focused submissions on special housing units erected in any prison. Mr. Noriega was cut off from the world in a special housing unit designed just for him. Had ADX been off the table, the evidence would have come before. There would have been more submissions, and the district judge would have had to grapple with special housing units. You don't find it in her judgment because it wasn't brought up before, right? So this is very important to note. Because the United States basically argued the whole time Assange is going to most likely be put in ADSIG and under SAMS in ADX Florence and of course in pretrial Alexandria. And that's all the judge deals with mainly. And so now they're trying to change the case. They're saying, you know what? No, we're not going to put him there. We're going to put him in something else. But what is that something else? We don't know. Could be any one of these, and they're all awful. So, and here he addresses acquittal, and this is very, I mean, this is evil. So he says that even if Assange goes to trial in the United States, and of course, if that happens, you know, it's going to go all the way to the Supreme Court, of course. So that could take a decade or more, who knows? Even if Assange is acquitted in the end, he's not found guilty of anything. What expert witnesses have told the court is that Kronberg can summon Julian Assange, right, to a grand jury, before a grand jury, and then incarcerate him for civil contempt and place him in a special housing unit. Again, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's what happened to Chelsea Manning, right? So she got her sentence commuted by Obama, and then she was summoned before a grand jury and thrown back in jail. So they're going to keep playing with Julian Assange because Kronberg has done this to other people in the past, right? It's not just a possibility. He's actually done this. This is a very dirty tactic, right? And this is important. Why is this important? Because it comes to the assurance about, can Julian Assange serve his jail sentence in Australia? This is one of the things that the United States is offering, right? They're saying now that on ground E, they're saying, well, don't worry, because we will even let Assange go to Australia to serve a sentence. And the defense addressed this argument, okay? They said that this would only work if Mr. Kronberg does not do what I just described to you, if he does not subpoena Assange back into custody and civil contempt, as he's done before. And on top of that, Australia would have to agree to take Assange, right? So when we say, when the United States says we can send Julian Assange to serve the sentence there, well, did Australia accept that? We have no clue if they would. So this could depend on various issues, political decision makers, so you don't know who's going to be in power by then. You know, like if you consider that this is going to take years, you know, what government is going to be in power by then? Who says that they will take Assange, even if there's an insurance now? There's no indication from Australia at all. They haven't responded to this. And even if that worked out, it would still take years, okay? And here they made something very important. They pointed out something very important as well. Just allow me a moment. I need to drink some water. Just 1 second. Okay, that's better. You'll excuse me. So, if we look at the assurance provided by the United States, the defense are saying that it's shady. Essentially, they're saying it cannot be it cannot be trusted because of the way that they've phrased it. When they are saying we will let Julian Assange serve his sentence in Australia, that's the prosecutors who are saying that, not the Department of Justice. So there's no guarantee that this would even come true, right? And they have examples of this. They actually have examples of this, which is Mendoza, for example. They refer to his case. So the Spanish court allowed Mendoza's extradition to the United States on the condition that he would be transferred back to Spain to serve any sentence. So he went there. He then applied, and the Department of Justice refused. They said, we never promised you that, we never said that we would grant you a prisoner transfer. That was only the prosecutors, which is what is happening right now with Assange. The DOJ is under no obligation to grant the transfer because it's only the prosecutors who are saying that, right? And he also offers the example of Abu Hamza, okay? So the district judge heard detailed evidence about the fate of Abu Hamza, who was promised transfer to an appropriate medical facility. Instead, he was sent to ADX following a BOP medical appraisal, right? So those assurances, they screwed him on that. And then Haroon Aswat, so Aswat's extradition to the USA from Broadmoor Hospital was subject of assurances of psychiatric placement and treatment. the understanding and expectation of the United Kingdom and the European Court regarding what should happen to Aswad and what the assurances promised was entirely obvious, right? But just like Abu Hamza, as soon as Aswad arrived on US soil, the opposite happened. They disagreed that he required hospitalization, right? So the UK and Europe allow the extradition, thinking that if he gets to the United States, they're going to put him in psychiatric, or just, give him a psychiatric placement and treatment. They didn't. They just decided, no, actually, we don't think that you should be hospitalized. And the assurance goes out the window, right? So they're giving you examples of this. Summer says it's loose wording ought to have alerted this court that the very opposite might happen. So the loose wording of the United States assurances to Julian Assange. He says the United States government had plans to do serious harm to Julian Assange. Mr. Pompeo has said that some of that is true. The former CIA director, he's confirmed it. And he recalls that the United States government has contemplated, if not plotted, kidnapping, poisoning, assassinating, rendering Julian Assange. Therefore, there must be an investigation of the assurances presented by the United States and if they can be trusted. Right? So his point is, I mean, look who you're dealing with. This government has considered maybe killing the defendant. How can you just take their assurances at face value? So that was the end of the arguments from the defense. And then the prosecution were able to respond for 30 minutes. As you recall, yesterday it was the opposite. We had the prosecution all day and then the defense for 30 minutes. So I'm just going to show you what the prosecution responded to all the arguments, or responses rather, laid out by the defense. Right? So Lewis, he rose for the prosecution, and then he basically responds to the cases that I just read to you about people who had their assurances thrown out the window by the U.S. So he says first that Abu Hamza was never given diplomatic assurances like Assange is being given. He said that his point was that Assange is being given something very special. It's not just any assurance, it's a diplomatic one. And that Abu Hamza had just a letter, something like that. And then regarding Mendoza, the Spaniard, so he was allowed to return to serve his sentence in Spain ultimately. Although I'm not sure that addresses the fact that, just because ultimately it worked out, I'm not sure if that counts as having not violated the assurance. And in regards to Chelsea Manning, he said that you can't compare anything because that's just it's a court martial, it's a military matter, and hence not relevant. And again, he says that about the timing, that because the defense said, why didn't you tell us about this before? Then we could have discussed this with the judge. We could have presented evidence about special housing units, CMUs, and so on. And Lewis, he responds that, we, the prosecution, we can offer assurances at any time. It doesn't have to have been before. And he said that a diplomatic assurance is a solemn undertaking given out at the highest order. These are not dished out like Smarties. This is a direct quote. And then he said that Assange would not be in conditions akin to Sam's if placed in administrative segregation. He said that ADSEG only applies in pretrial and would only be in ADC Alexandria, which is a very well-run jail. These are actual things that he said. And don't worry, it gets worse. So that doesn't change. I don't see him addressing the argument about the length of pretrial, right? Because the defense said, okay, even if you put him in ADSEG, that's going to last for years. It will take years before there's a trial at all. He doesn't seem to have addressed that. And I don't know what his opinion of a well-run jail is, but there you go. That's what he said. He made the point that in ADSEG, you're allowed communication. You can attend 3 programs with GenPop, with the general population of the prison. You can meet with your lawyers on an unlimited basis. And that the defense is characterizing ADSEG as not simply isolation, but solitary confinement. And he said, it is impossible to describe that as solitary confinement. He said, according to the European Court, as to why special administrative measures are not oppressive, it's because it's not solitary confinement if you can meet with your lawyer on unlimited occasions. It's simply not isolation because you have 2 people in a cell, right? And then he says, when the defense call it solitary confinement, it's simply nonsense. If we look at the judge's ruling, she only dealt with the conditions of SAMS and ADX. And that ADSEG and SAMS are completely different. He said if Assange is placed in a special housing unit, So again, do you see how the prosecution is confirming what the defense is saying, that there is a risk that Assange could be placed in something oppressive, just not ADX Florence. So it will still be something oppressive, but instead of ADX, it'll be special housing unit. So he's inadvertently confirming this. He says, if Assange is placed in an SHU, Kronberg makes it clear that it's not solitary confinement. And that he says the defense is now saying, what the judge actually did is that the very finding of extradition would drive him to suicide, right? So it's not just the prison conditions, it's just the fact that Assange, faced with an extradition, the fact, if he's forced to be extradited, would drive him to suicide. And he's saying that now they're changing the argument. He's saying the defense was aiming everything at the conditions of SAMS and ADX, and Mr. Assange is thinking, I'll be sent to SAMS and ADX, and that's why he's suicidal, right? So he's accusing the defense of basing their entire case on the fact that Assange is going to SAMS and ADX. And Lewis then says, now that Assange knows he's not going to SAMS and ADX because of the assurances given by the US, that this must reduce the suicidal ideology. Now he knows that he's not going to be subjected to that, right? So he's saying that the defense's case is, it's gone out the window. It has no basis anymore because Assange knows he's not going to be put in these conditions. He's not going to be jailed in ADX Florence. So he has no reason to be suicidal, right? The suicidal ideation goes down. That's his point. He says Assange is not going to spend his life subject to SAMS in the ADX. In addition, he knows he will get the required medical care because the United States have never broken a diplomatic assurance ever. Assange knows if convicted, he can serve his sentence in Australia. Now he has hope to look forward to that. I mean, I don't know about you, but I don't think anyone looks forward to going to jail, even if it's in their home country. I don't know what that even means. But he literally said that. He actually said that. And then his point is that all these matches must greatly reduce the risk of suicide. And again, that, Koppelman's assessment, the defense's case was based only on the worst case scenario of SAMS and ADX Florence. And he starts quoting from the other medical experts from all of them, and starts basically saying that Assange is not actually really depressed. He's just moderately depressed. It's not as bad as you're saying it is. And so if he's only moderately depressed and we remove the prison conditions from SAMS and we don't put him in ADX Florence, then the suicide risk will go down and he's fit to be extradited. That's the point he's trying to drive at. And that was it. The judges then said they've been given much to think about. That's what they said. And will consider everything. And there's no ruling yet. So we had 2 days, the prosecution first, and then the defense presenting their arguments, and then a brief response, 30 minutes each. And now the judges, they didn't say when they're going to give a ruling. It could be, I don't know, weeks, months. It's, when it happens, though, I'll be one of the first to report about it. So don't worry about that. But, it's grueling. I mean, this is what happened. This is what happened. So these are the arguments they're presenting. So as I said, the main two topics are, health, suicide risk, the mental illness, and then assurances, right? So, I mean, I have no clue which way the judges are going to rule. Who knows? Who knows, honestly? It's very hard to tell. It's not like, they give hints or something. I will make a point, though. One of the judges presiding over this, because we had two of them, right? So I think it was Burnett, and the other one was Holroyd. Holroyd is the judge who decided that the United States can appeal on all 5 grounds back on August 11th, which was a win for the United States. So he allowed them to appeal the health grounds. Just to put that into context, if I'm not mistaken. I think I've double-checked, but I'm just giving you some background info. It doesn't necessarily mean he will rule again in the favor of the U.S., but this is just what we know until now. And it's very tough to say, honestly. Now, I'll give you my thoughts. I've tried to wait. It's been a long day again, but I'll give you my thoughts in a second. I just want to play you some of the great speeches that happened outside the High Court, and then we can dive into it, right? So don't go anywhere. This is Jeremy Corbyn, former Labour leader and Labour MP.
It's a little strange that throughout all the legal proceedings in Britain, the world's media has come to London to report on Julian and report on the significance, the global significance of this case. But the people that are missing are the very media just down the road who haven't bothered to report it. This is a major human rights issue. And I think the slogan we have up here, don't extradite Assange, journalism is not a crime. The real journalists around the world, Julian and a number of others, tell the truth. I want all of our media, irrespective of which billionaire owns that particular channel or newspaper, to report the truth about the way in which Julian Assange has been treated, and demand this court rejects the appeal that sadly President Biden has continued, that President Trump launched, and that he be released from Belmarsh prison.
So that's an extremely important point. You know, he's talking about the whole, you know, media around the world have come to report about this, and the outlets just down the road are doing nothing. I mean, I can tell you personally, there's no one from the BBC or the Guardian attending this court case, right? And it's extremely treacherous, honestly, because you have to take into consideration a lot of these newspapers, they profited immensely from WikiLeaks. You know, WikiLeaks WikiLeaks pioneered this sort of collaborative investigative journalism, right? So, which again, this shows you how these myths, these claims that WikiLeaks would just dump information is complete rubbish, because they would actually go through this arduous process of redacting everything and working with other media outlets to publish the stories properly in due course. And so, I mean, The Guardian, The New York Times, there's so many outlets, there's too many to name. If I'm not mistaken, Le Monde, Presse, they've all worked with WikiLeaks on Iraq, on Afghanistan, on diplomatic cables. They have really, really benefited so much from their partnership with WikiLeaks. Where are these people now? I can tell you they're not in the courtroom. I didn't see them. So you see how they've thrown him to the wolves. And another thing that I recall, when they released this joint statement, I think it was The Guardian, and even though the security leak, the breach came from The Guardian, right? With the again, we talked about this during the extradition hearing, how David Lee published the password in his book for for God knows what reason, and basically helped unlock the cables. I mean, these. So Cryptome.org posted the cables first, and then WikiLeaks posted them because the cat's already out the bag, right? Which again proves to you that it's not true. WikiLeaks just recklessly posted things online. They did it after it was already there because of a security breach that wasn't their fault. Again, we went through this in court, but my point here is that just one day, it took them one day to release this joint statement and then turn against WikiLeaks, The Guardian, all of them, right? And you can see that to this day. They've just thrown him to the wolves. A lot of these people, they made money. They gained in prestige, in awards, in recognition for their journalistic endeavors, which were in large part, thanks to WikiLeaks cooperating with them as media partners. And they're nowhere to be found. So, I want to play you a really good speech over here from Mick Wallace, who's an MEP. Take a look at this.
The idea that we would accept any assurance from a state that has been lawless for the best part of 100 years. The US has been a colonial project since the day of its founding, starting with the genocide of the native Indians of North America. And it hasn't stopped since. But there's so much at stake in this, and that's why it's so important that you're here. Only we need an awful lot more. There's an awful lot at stake. I don't say democracy at stake, because that's been pretty well lost, and I haven't seen a whole lot of it around for a while. But journalism Journalism is in serious danger. It's already been undermined. Mainstream media have lost the plot and have sold out. It's all the more reason why journalism is more and more important. Real journalism where people tell the truth. But international law is equally under threat. The Americans break it every day. They're a lawless state. All the more reason why Assange shouldn't be sent there.
Yep. I mean, what is there to disagree with, honestly? They make this whole thing out to be a question of law and Assange facing justice. Yesterday, you know, the prosecutors are going off about how, you know, well, we have to deliver justice, not what Assange considers perceived justice. You know, basically like he. It's nothing to do about that. I mean, the crux of the issue here is you have a journalist who exposed crimes that, I mean, what he's accused of don't even come close to, and he's being demonized for it, you know? Like, if it's really about justice, if it's really, like, if you really want to make it about that, then why are the people who committed these war crimes, who were kidnapping and torturing people, like, you know, all the crimes that are mentioned, the various crimes that are mentioned in WikiLeaks publications, what are you doing about them? Where's the justice for their actions? It's not about justice, because you have you have one journalist being demonized and the real criminals are walking free, right? And that's the real crux of the issue. I mean, I'm really angry about this, but I'm just exhausted. And I think Claire Daly, she said this very well over here. I'll play you her speech as well quickly.
Thanks very much. And I think, like all of you, for us to be here is both a crime and an honour. It's a crime that we have to be here in support of the person who, more than anyone else, has exposed US war crimes in Afghanistan and Iraq. The criminals walk free and Julian Assange is persecuted. That is a crime.
Yep. The criminals walk free and Julian Assange is persecuted. That's, you know, this is what it's always been about. In my eyes, you know, of course, there are many injustices committed towards Assange. It's journalism itself is at stake, but the real criminals are walking free. No one is going to be judged for Iraq. No one is going to be judged for Afghanistan. Nothing, man. It's like, as I told you, George Bush's name does not even come up once in the whole case at any point, at any stage. Nothing. The most that you'll ever hear George Bush's name is when I said it outside the Old Bailey. That's it. You won't hear it inside. It's preposterous. It's really preposterous. And you have to take into consideration that this is going on for ages now. Going on for ages. You know, the legal process is the punishment. And nothing is normal in this case. Nothing. You know, in regular circumstances, this case would have been thrown out. When it comes to Tony Blair, the High Court was like, no, we're not prosecuting him for war crimes because a war of aggression is not a crime in the UK in British common law. It's off the table. No way. Julian Assange, they will take him all the way to the Supreme Court and they still won't leave him alone. So it's a double standard here. You have two different legal systems, you know, And these people are above the law. They know this. You know, they openly talk about killing Julian Assange. Like, you know, we should drone strike him, right? Didn't Hillary say that? They openly talk about killing him. Mike Pompeo confirming that, you know, he's angered more about the CIA sources revealing that they were considering killing him than the actual plot itself about killing Assange, which predates him, but nevertheless, right? So they openly say, yeah, we want to kill Assange, or they inadvertently admit it. And that's totally fine. Look, man. I'm going to tell you something, man. When I'm covering this stuff and I'm seeing Julian Assange, I don't care what anyone says. That man does not deserve to be in that state. He does not deserve to be in that state. There is nothing he did that merits such a punishment. Nothing. I'm not going to hear it. So, you know, I won't have it. I won't have it. Here, I want to play you a clip from the WikiLeaks editor-in-chief, Kristen. So he was also outside the High Court again, and he spoke earlier today. Here you go. This is a long ass thread. I'm trying to find it. I just whizzed past it, man. Hold on. There we go.
They're arguing that because the Professor Koppelman, did leave out in his preliminary report the fact that Julian had Stella as a partner and 2 children, that he was unreliable. The preliminary report was handed to the court, I think, 10 months before he handed his final report with the full disclosure. So that goes to show how thin the case is. And why did the professor leave out the name of Stella? He explained it himself. It wasn't because Julian asked for it or Stella, because he felt for her safety. And why what was he considered about her safety and the children? Yes, because the information was becoming noted. We were actually having information out about the extraordinary measures that were being taken against Julian inside the embassy, and indeed against Stella and the children, by stealing the nappy, by spying on all activity inside the Ecuadorian embassy.
Right, so again, the whole argument now about health grounds is that, oh, you can't trust Koppelman because he concealed Stella Morris' identity. He didn't reveal that Assange had kids with her. What does that have to do with his medical testimony? The judge said she doesn't really care. I mean, she cares in the sense that it was inappropriate, but she doesn't feel that he misled her on Assange's depression. She valued Koppelman's testimony above everyone else's. And why? Why did Koppelman not disclose Stella Morris' identity? Why did he conceal her identity and the 2 children? Because the CIA are out to kill Assange. They're spying on him in the embassy. They're not stupid. Everything has turned out to be true. It's been confirmed over and over. Not to mention the other psychiatrists also knew about the children and didn't say anything themselves. So does that mean the medical experts called by the prosecution are also misleading the court? Clear double standards. Honestly, it's clear double standards. I'm astonished. I am astonished that this case has gotten so far and not been thrown out yet. It's unacceptable. This should have been thrown out on day 1. If you're going to prosecute Julian Assange, you have to prosecute everyone. Those newspapers, the large newspapers who profited from WikiLeaks publications, who benefited so much from their partnership with WikiLeaks. All these nice accolades and perks and prestige and money and recognition for their journalistic endeavors. Where are they now? Where are they now? They won't even come to the court to cover the case. They won't even come to cover the case when he's being thrown to the wolves after he helped them build their careers. Scandalous. 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 The only way to describe this entire affair, scandalous. There is no way you can look at this case and not find holes this big. It's Swiss cheese. There's no way you can look at it. Legally, morally, ethically, there's nothing that makes sense. There's nothing okay about this. Every law you can think of, every jurisdiction you can name, this case has violated it. You want to judge real criminals, you want to make this about the law. The roles should be reversed. The United States should be on trial for murdering 1 million Iraqis, for displacing millions more, for destroying Afghanistan, for the drone program, for the CIA going around killing people, torturing people, rendering them. These people should be on trial, not a journalist. You know, they want to come around and say, oh, the United Kingdom is a civilized country. There's open justice. The United States is a civilized country, is a free man. And where is it? Everything they accuse other countries of doing, of being oppressive, of persecuting dissidents, persecuting journalists, they're doing it in broad daylight. Literally in broad daylight. I'm telling you, I'm seeing it in broad daylight in central London. right, in their civilized capital. Scandalous. Scandalous. So I'm very angry about this, and I'm very tired. And everyone should be angry about this. Seriously, this is so much more than just Assange. Like, already just what's happening to him on a personal level, to him and his family. You know, I mean, this is crazy, right? You got one of the biggest intelligence agencies on earth persecuting a journalist on the other side of the planet. This guy has done nothing to the United States. I think he's been there once on holiday when he was younger. He hasn't done anything in the United States. He doesn't owe the United States anything. But just the ramifications this has for everyone else. What do you think they're going to do next? If they extradite Assange, you don't even want to know what's coming next. You think this is bad? Who knows what the hell they're going to do next? They will feel emboldened. It will become worse. And this is already, I don't know how it can get worse. Dude, I'm sitting there, I'm listening to the high court, and they're telling the judge, you know, the CIA is trying to kill our client. Like, I mean, how long? It should take the judge 1 second to throw this out. What more proof do you need? What more proof do you need? How many things have to set off, you know, alarm bells and red flags? How many more of those do you need before you throw this out? For God's sake, man. And now they want to make it out to be Assange as a malingerer. He's pretending to be depressed. Oh, yeah, okay, he's depressed, but he's not really depressed. He's depressed enough that he has a diagnosis, but he can still be extradited. And, you know, we can make sure that he's the first person to be extradited from the UK to the US and who will commit suicide. And then we'll extradite him again. He can go to Australia, maybe, but not really. All the assurances the United States gave are trash. They're garbage. I'm telling you. I just told you. I've just broke it down from A to Z. It's trash. It's trash. You cannot trust them. They even gave you examples of previous inmates, previous respondents, defendants who were given assurances by the United States. The United States screwed them. You think the CIA, who has the power to put Assange in special administrative measures, the worst prison conditions, you really think they are not going to do that? The moment he sets foot on US soil? You are crazy. I don't care what you think of Assange or the CIA or anything. You are crazy if you think that that's not going to be the case. They're salivating. They can't wait to get him there so they can put him under SAMs. You know how they built a special housing unit just for Noriega? I guarantee, look, man, I bet you anything you like, he will be put under SAMs. And if not that, they will build him his own special housing unit. They're sadistic. I mean, look at the crimes that WikiLeaks exposed. What more proof do you need? It's not an opinion. It's a fact. It's scandalous. Honestly, it's scandalous. So these assurances, they're not even worth the paper they're written on. They're really not. And I struggle to see how judges cannot come to appreciate this, that they have, you know, you can't trust the United States, man. And it's not even just about that. You have to keep in mind, even if Assange is not extradited ultimately, why was the United Kingdom doing this to him? Why was the United Kingdom doing this to him, allowing this to be done? If they can, you know, do this to Julian Assange, who, I mean, really, without a shadow of doubt, is one of the most famous journalists, most successful journalists alive, then they'll do it to anyone. You know, anyone else is going to be small fries after that, right? If they can persecute him in central London in broad daylight, you know, London, oh, pinnacle of civilization, right? Open justice. If they can do that, they do it to anyone, because people allow it to happen. People are allowing this to happen. You know, the media are purposely not informing the public about this trial. And the result of that is you have ignorance. It's the same with any issue. You have ignorance. You have a populace. You have a planet, you know, because it's not just a UK issue. It's an international issue. You have just widespread ignorance about this case. And then, of course, it makes it much easier to get away with it, you know? Scandalous. Honestly, scandalous. I have no other words. So I just want to say thank you to Austin Hall, who sent the biggest super chat we've ever had on the channel. So I'm the message also that Austin sent is free Assange, abolish the CIA. I could not think of a better message to accompany the biggest super chat we've ever had on the channel. That is extremely generous of you. Thank you so much, Austin. I don't even know what to say. I'm I'm exhausted, and you know, I'm really grateful. I'm really grateful. I know some of you guys sent some other tips and questions. I'm gonna read them. I'm gonna read them for you and answer your questions. Just a second, it's loading. We got one over here from Vicky. Vicky says, thank you. You make it so clear and you're so thorough. Much appreciated. You're most welcome, Vicky. I'm glad to hear that. I'm happy to hear that because, man, let me tell you, it's really difficult, you know, sitting there for like God knows how many hours and then trying to spit it all out in a condensed manner, but not condensed. I mean, we take our time here, of course, but still in a thorough manner. So I'm happy to hear that very much. Florin sent both a sticker and a note. He says, thank you both, Richard and Claudia. You are doing important and excellent work. Thank you. It's always good to see you, Florin. I appreciate it. Naz said, thank you for covering this in depth. No one is covering it the way you are. Excellent journalism. Hashtag free Julian Assange. I mean, I don't know what to say. I'm so humbled to hear that. Really, thank you. Thank you so much. We have a sticker over here, a super sticker from Trav. Thank you so much. And I mean, the super chat from Austin. Thank you again. Free Assange, abolish the CIA. What more could you want? What more could you want? On Rockfin, we have a tip from Margaret. Thank you very much, Margaret. And we have one from Christophe. My brain switched to French. We have one from Christophe as well. Thank you very much. You guys are very generous. I think we also have something on Venmo from Marissa. Marissa said, long time no see, but glad to be back. I'm glad to see you too. Not sure if you saw my previous Venmo, but feel free to email me at Code Pink. Oh, I get it. Really? You're working there now? That's amazing. I will. I most certainly will. I had Code Pink on for after the Daniel Hale. I had one of your I guess your colleagues now, right? I'm so proud of you, Marissa. That's excellent. I had I think it was Dana Katovich. She came on and we talked about Daniel Hale after his sentencing. So I most certainly will, and that's great to hear. I'm really proud of you. Well done. So I don't know if I read everything. If I got all your questions and comments, I don't want to miss anyone. This is a super chat from Among Friends, and they said, thank you, Richard, for speaking truth to power. No need to thank me, but I'm very grateful nonetheless. I mean, you know, I'd be covering this either way, but I'm all the more grateful that, you know, I have a large platform and many people to communicate with and to you know, I can tell people about this. I can raise awareness in some manner, and yeah, I'm grateful for that because people need to know. I cannot believe this is still going on. Davis says, Richard rocks. Davis rocks. Thank you. Thank you very much. We have a sticker over here from Retro Man. I love these stickers. Is that a pair? Thank you very much, Retro Man. And John says, only source I'm hearing this from. Thank you. You're most welcome, and I thank you guys for your support. It's so humbling to see this. Véro says, French MP François Ruffin from Mélenchon's Left Party called for Julian's freedom. I mean, it's really good to see people, politicians showing up like Mick Wallace and Claire and Jeremy Corbyn, you know, Irish and English politicians showing up in front of the court. There are other MPs as well in the UK, but it's also great seeing that in other countries. I feel that you have a lot of support for Assange in France, as Véro just mentioned, and in Germany. And I think the French Assange supporters, they've been asking me to do some stuff in French, so I have to oblige them, of course. Et je ferai ça certainement. Donc, merci beaucoup, Véro, ça fait plaisir. Et we got another tip over here. I think this is on PayPal, and it's from Jackie. And it says, thank you, great coverage. Thank you, Jackie. You're very kind. So, yeah, guys, I guess in a few hours, I'm going to go on some... So I was already on RT earlier to talk about this, and I'm going to go on, I think, a couple of shows. I don't want to spoil, but if you're following me on Twitter, I will post the links, or Instagram, I'll post the links. I'm going to go on a couple of shows very soon to talk about Assange. And yeah, I'm grateful for the opportunity to do that, to raise awareness. So that's good. Retro Man sent another sticker. Says, "You are amazing." Man, these stickers are really great. Thank you very much, Retro. You are amazing. Thank you. So, again, I'm very humbled by your support. You guys are the best. I'm just happy to have you tuning in. I see we have over 350 people watching. That's wonderful. I have no complaints in the likes department, but if you haven't hit the like button, please do that. It helps with the algorithm. You know, as many people as possible need to see this. We shouldn't allow because obviously mainstream media aren't even covering this properly to begin with, but in the instances where they do cover it, they always throw crap in there to make it seem like it's sort of, you know, a less scandalous issue, or they throw in a couple of smears about Assange that have nothing to do with what's going on. And, you know, I want not just myself, but my colleagues that I mentioned yesterday, Kevin, Stefania, we got Consortium News, so Joey as well, Kathy, Tarek, Muhammad, you know, Mary, they should all be getting... so Mohammed Al-Mazi, Tarek Haddad, and Mary Kostakidis, they should also be getting all the recognition because they've been doing amazing work, hard work, and, you know, as Kevin said, covering it from the beginning. So, you know, you're getting the real McCoy from them. Retro Man has sent an even bigger sticker. I appreciate that very much. Thank you. Oh man, these are great. I'm just enjoying the view of the colors. So that's very pleasing for me. We got everything now. Thank you, Retro Man. You rock. So with that said, I'm just going to close by saying thank you to you all for tuning in. And if you want to support independent media, you can donate, as many of you have on Rockfin or YouTube, and I'm very grateful. Or as well on CashApp, Venmo, PayPal. You just scan the QR code with your camera and it should work. So, yeah, I don't know what else to say. There's the Patreon as well. I'm kind of exhausted. I'm just going to leave the links below. You can support the show monthly if you want as well. So I'm able to do this thanks to you guys, because you guys support independent media and you allow me to do this. I'm very grateful. Thank you so much. I'm going to leave all the links below. And if you aren't following on Instagram, Twitter, go ahead so you can keep up with where I'm going to go on to talk about Assange. And... yeah, if that's it, then... Jay Smith says, "Keep it up, be relentless. We must find a way to make our corrupt courts and government accountable. There must be a way to do it. Merci. Merci à toi." And I know this sounds a bit idealistic, but I think there is some truth to it. There should be some truth to it. The coverage does help, no doubt. You know, as many people have said before, the Assange case is a case that needs to be won, not just in you know, a court of law, but in the court of public opinion. It's a case that is a political case, and political cases, you beat them, or you can fight them at least very effectively with the help of public opinion. And of course, in order to do that, one of the tools you can use is coverage, is news, right? And so when you have honest coverage, good coverage of what's really going on in there, or just simply unbiased, because if you just tell people what is happening in the court, it's very easy to see what's going on. It's not even a question of you know, having to break it down so much. The injustice is very apparent. But what the media do, they pull this smoke and mirrors trick. So they try to make it seem like it's some super complex. It is a complex case because of it, you know, simply of how big it is. But the injustice is not complex. You have a journalist who's being prosecuted, you know, in an unprecedented fashion that has never been used against a publisher, and he's being prosecuted because he exposed war crimes and other crimes by the state. And this is not even a country that he lives in. It's an, you know, it's an extraterritorialization of U.S. law. It's, I mean, scandalous. Again, like I said, completely scandalous. And once you break this down, which is why I take the time to do that, it becomes very clear what's going on. Okay, my voice needs to take a rest. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I'm very grateful. And yeah, I'll leave all the links below. And I'll see you guys next time. Thank you. Thank you guys very much. Take care. Ma salame. Bye-bye.